Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is If I'm Really Honest.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where curiosity is rewarded, ignorance isn't punished, and conflict doesn't mean contempt. Have you ever used the term snail mail before to refer to the post office? Well, Jim Rutt coined that term back in 1981, long before you probably even knew that email existed.
Oh, that little mark with the A and then the ring around it. I've never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. See, there it is. Violence at NBC, GE.com. I mean...
He was building out the internet for decades before most of us even knew what internet was.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network, the one that's becoming really big now. A lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
He was working at a place called The Source, which was the very first consumer online service in the year, well, any guesses? You're wrong. It was 1980. So it's no wonder that in the year 2000, when everyone was just realizing that the internet wasn't a fad...
Every business, no matter how large, and no matter how small, will be on the internet in the year 2000.
Well, it's very hip to be on the internet right now.
If you wanted a web address, there was only one place in the world you could go to get it. A little company called Network Solutions. And the CEO? This time you're right. It's Jim Rutt. The guy who's been working on AI for at least a good decade before you knew such a thing was possible. Since selling that company, he's gone on to about 1 million other projects, like being the chairman at the Santa Fe Institute, which studies complexity science. And I would explain that here, but it's, too complex. He's also the chairman of the California Institute for Machine Consciousness. And it's a little comforting that you and I both know that such a thing isn't possible. It's a little troubling that Jim Rutt thinks it might be. He also hosts The Jim Rutt Show, which I've been listening to for years. He reliably features guests that I've never heard of before who are doing incredible work and thinking incredible thoughts that the rest of the world usually warms up to a couple years later. And somehow I almost forgot to mention that he's also the founder of this little thing called Game B, where some of the world's greatest minds, and then thousands of people like me, are experimenting and exploring ways of literally changing our society, which is driven by competition, growth, and short-term profit, and then instead creating a society that rewards sustainability and long-term resilience. I, of course, don't add much to the group, but it's a great place to lurk and interact with some of the most creative minds I've ever encountered. And I'm sure as soon as I publish this episode, I'm going to remember a whole bunch of other things that are on his immense resume. He's a genius. He's a creative. He's my kind of crazy. So if you want to know what's going to be cutting edge tomorrow, go check out his Substack and his podcast. But if you'd rather hear hot takes from a piano teacher who's curious about all the things he didn't study while he was in a cult, then like and subscribe right here.
I'm afraid that if I subscribed to something like internet, I would get hooked and I would never, spend time with my family.
Because today we're talking about the persistence of religion, consciousness, AI, and Jim Rutt's newly published Minimal Viable Metaphysics. Hold on, everybody. This is Jim Rutt. How do you explain the persistence of religion and Christianity?
Not just Christianity. I think Christianity is just one example. And I would describe it as a bug in the human operating system. One of the theories I read is that it's an overactive agent detector, which was probably actually useful when we're on the savannah. So let's think about the two classes of error. There's some rustling in the grass. Could be the wind, or it could be a lion, right? You better have a somewhat overactive agency detector that says lion, even if 9 times out of 10, it's just the wind. And that could well have been hijacked once we got language going and shamans and would-be chiefs, etc., learned to spin stories and basically hijacked the overactive agency detector and said, ooh, this rock's got a god in it, and this tree does too, right? And people like stories. I famously read Lord of the Rings 38 times, right? I love a good intricate story that's got a creator god and various, minor gods and intermediate gods. Stuff those things are cool, and so humans fall for that sort of stuff. So I think that's how it got started. Now, how did it persist? This is a bigger question. And this is, kind of very interesting. And the best I can tell from doing a fair bit of reading is that it does in many cases, give groups a competitive advantage, right? We are together. We have shared values. We believe in the same spooky guy in the sky, right? And, oh, by the way, we're committed to killing the people next door who have a different spooky guy in the sky. And so if our spooky guy in the sky story is more believable and more animating, our little gang of people goes over, kills them, takes their women and children, right? And if you let that run over biological evolutionary time, we actually select for co-evolved stories and biomes that produce small group coherence. And so I think that's, as good a story as I can come up with on why this silly shit is still out there. I mean, even really smart people believe this shit. What the fuck? Right?
Right. Why doesn't one of them beat the other if it's a matter of the best story? It seems like it's whatever story you're given is the one that you latch on to.
And of course, that is part of just in the same way that, you have the genes of your parents, mixed all up, not the same, but you start with a working set. And so any group starts with the set of stories that were in it when the group was formed, or that the people who came to form the group brought with them. So I don't have in general, the freedom to sit down with a blank piece of paper and write the optimal mental parasitic story. Though occasionally that happens, like Scientology. Literally, sure. the guy was sitting having dinner with some of his science fiction writing buddies and said, I'll bet you $5 I can start a religion that'll work. I've heard that story. I don't know if it's true or not.
Right. Yeah.
But he did, and it worked to a degree, but it didn't take over the world, fortunately. Right. And I suspect there's a bunch of reasons for that, because these things are always in competition. Same reason that no single species of animals ate all the other ones, right?
Right.
You have an ecosystem, appeals to some people, works in some environments, doesn't work in others.
But when we're talking about, because flat Earth, I still have a hard time believing there are people who actually believe that. But, for the most part, everyone at some point believed the obvious thing, which is that the Earth is flat. And then a better idea came along, and we went with that. Why can't the truth of non-God take over the truth of God?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Let's look at Christianity as an example. And Islam, they're very similar, right? Judaism, basically, they all worship that guy in the sky, right? So it's so hilarious that they hate each other, even though they're really the same. If you took the space of all possible religions and called that a ping pong table, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, you could cover them with a dime, pretty much.
Well, that's the fun of it. That's how you get a new denomination. How you know you're the right one.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And I step back further and say that in the space of at least 10,000 religions that anthropologists have discovered, how in the world do you think that yours is the right one? And yet humans do. And and this is really interesting too. And it's kind of a round and about story, but one of the questions people often ask is, America is kind of unusual for an advanced country in how religious it is. And the best story I have heard for why America is more religious than, say, European countries is all the European countries have an official state religion that always had an unfair advantage in, getting churches paid for by the king and this and that. U.S. tried not to and mostly didn't. And so there's ferocious competition. So our religions are more evolved to be sticky. They are mimetic viruses that, because they had to outcompete, the Baptists had to outcompete the Presbyterians, who had to outcompete the Methodists, who had to outcompete the snake handlers and all this stuff. And and each of them found their niche, but they're all more fit than some stale old state religion in Europe. And again, and then to take that story up a level, all the world's religions, because, the anthropologists know of 10,000, I'll be willing to bet there was 10 million over time, that 999 of them died out before they got to the third believer. And only the good ones survived, and they're pretty damn good mental viruses.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and you're talking about European religions, you go a little bit farther east, and it seems like there's perhaps more extremism or more buy-in. They're, in several cases, less neutral, it seems.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay.
Let's go all the way east. Somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, what did I thought was the least ridiculous religion? And I stopped and thought about it for a moment. I said, probably Taoism. And I said, why is that? And they asked me, why is that? I said, well, because it says the least. And since whatever it says is bullshit, the religion that says the least, is the best. And, you go to the Far East and, they hold their religions relatively lightly. Taoism doesn't, put a gun to your head and say, you got to believe Taoism, I'm going to kill you. All right. And, the Chinese folk religion, they don't give a shit if you believe it or not. It's basically about worshiping their ancestors and living honorably to respect their ancestors. They're pretty non-virulent religions in some sense. I think the real hot religions are those desert religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Those are the ones that want to kill people that don't believe their shit. Buddhists, they don't care. They don't give a shit if you believe their stuff or not. So I would disagree with that. I would say that the Abrahamic religions are the hottest of the major religions in terms of trying to, convert their neighbors at bayonet point.
What is it, do you think, that separates people like you from people who formerly hold your type of worldview? What keeps you where you are, and what allows them to go back if it's a matter of realizing the ridiculousness or the utility of it?
Well, this, of course, as I mentioned, these things are great mind viruses. Let's take Christianity for an example. There's a guy in the sky that I can't prove is there or not there, right? And you're a former pastor. You probably know about Pascal's wager,
Right.
which basically says, all right, even if there's only one chance in a million that God exists, but if you get it wrong, it's an infinity. It's 1 trillion years of torture on the sulfur lake, right?
If there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing.
And you can put that kind of gaslighting on people, and a tremendous number of people fall for that. Even very intelligent people, even my buddy Jordan Hall, one of the smartest people I know, right? I don't think he fell for it for that reason, but he
Sure.
I think he convinced himself through some torturous round the rose garden kind of logic. But so, yes, these things are very well designed to be hard to disprove. Right now, I'll give you another story. I have a good friend. She's a pastor. And she'll be retiring at the end of the year. We're good friends. We love to argue. And one day she said, Jim, when we'll take, I haven't had her on my podcast once. Her name is Beth Piles. And
Cool.
it's an excellent episode for people that are sincerely interested in religion. She said, Jim, when will it take you to believe? And I said, that came up with the instant story. I said, all right, Beth, let me, give me 2 weeks notice. Now this is what I want God to do. So I can get 5 film crews and 1,000 people to show up. I want the Washington Monument to rise up off its base, 200 feet in the air, spin 3 times vertically around its axis, and then set itself back down on its base with no damage done. You get that to happen on the day and the time you say it'll happen, I will bend my knee and say, Beth, I was wrong. And of course she said, well, that's not how it works. I go,
Right. It's never how it works.
it's never how it works. So that's my point. One of the things that makes it really hard for people to shake it is that it's specifically designed to be undisprovable. In science, we have this concept of falsifiability, that if I make a claim and there's no possible way it could be disproven, it's not actually a scientific claim. For instance, if I say that gravity will cause an apple to fall towards the ground when I release it, there's a very easy falsifiable experiment I can do. Hold an apple, release it, see if it falls, right? But religions are carefully designed not to be falsifiable. And of course, the other one is the group coherence thing we talked about earlier. Why they have co-evolved. Our biology and the belief systems evolved together to be strong for group coherence. And most people are very subject to what other people think about them. If there's one of the better known personality measures in psychology called the Ocean protocol: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It's one of the very best validated in labs and in real life. And most people are middle to high in agreeableness. I happen to know, I took the test, I am at the very bottom in agreeableness. I don't give two fucks what anybody thinks, right? And not that I just will fight for fighting's sake, but it's just the fact that my neighbors think I'm wrong. I go, okay, so they think I'm wrong. So what, right? Doesn't cause me any angst. And then I'm also very lucky that I'm also extremely low in neuroticism. I don't care what they think. And even if they did think I'm an asshole, I don't care. It doesn't stir me up too much.
Yes. I've got the opposite combo, unfortunately. I'm extremely high in neuroticism, so I care very much. But I still can't bring myself to tell what I know to be a lie, which is what brings me to the podcast, actually. So then you said that their religions are carefully designed to not be falsifiable. That seems like an emergent quality to me, having lived in it for a long time.
Yeah, let's say they unfolded that way, right? Or evolved. People sometimes overuse evolved because evolved means things changed, multiple things occurred, and some were selected out. And that's
over generations.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think about the Baptist religion, where each congregation is independent, and each one has slightly different beliefs. And some of those beliefs work better than others, and some of them propagate faster than others. And over time, there's a selection mechanism. So a more virulent form of baptism is probably, the stuff that's on offer at a larger number rather than a smaller number of Baptist churches. Just relatively simple, selection for more virulent mind viruses.
So I'd love to pass this by you and see what your thoughts are about this. Experientially, it seems true. It seems obvious that religion is true, that there is a God. In the same way, my analogy would be love. Like currently, as I walk about my life, I love my kids. I love my wife. And that's just, it's an experience. And no one could convince me that I don't. However, also, I know that that's not a real thing. This is a neurochemical reaction that makes me feel like this thing exists that is love, although it's not a separate entity. It just feels, the experience is, it feels like a separate entity. And if someone tried to convince me, no, love isn't real, it's a waste of my time. I already know it's real. So you're obviously wrong. Whatever your explanation is, it has to include love because love is real. I know it to be true.
Oh, that's fair. And this actually is a good bridge to consciousness. We want to go there. The Ruttian view on this thing is that love is real, that the experiences in our head are things, right? They're actually represented, I would argue, and the work we do in consciousness science would argue, that there are patterns and dynamics in the brain which are happening when you are experiencing, say, love for your child, right? And that we don't understand them today, but in principle, we'd be able to have a super brain scanner that says, oh, he's feeling love for his 5-year-old. Ain't that sweet, right? It's instantiated in some physical form and not a static form. And this is what I bring to the table with this Santa Fe Institute complexity science. It's a dynamics. It's a dance, not just the dancers. Your neurons are the dancers. The firing patterns that are going on are the dance. And the dance is real. The dance is as real as a rock. And so someone thinking that God exists is real, right? When my good friend Beth tells me that she believes God is real, that belief is a real thing. The belief is a real thing, but God is not. Or at least,
okay, but is the experience of God real?
Yeah, the experience of believing that God exists is real.
Okay.
But that is not the same. A perfect example. One of the old proofs or alleged proofs of God was it makes people good. And I go, well, Santa Claus makes 4-year-olds good for about
absolutely
2 months
for
a year.
Second.
It's a great trick. Just because 4-year-olds believe in Santa Claus and it makes them good does not mean Santa Claus is real. Now, the idea of Santa Claus is real. So you have to get your epistemology right. What is it you're talking about? Are you talking about belief or are you talking about existence? And so, yes, the belief in God is real, but that does not make God real.
Right. Okay. So then, back to the love thing, because I think this is a great example, and I would prefer, I think, a child's relationship with a teddy bear, perhaps to Santa, be for a lot of reasons. Actually, we'll just leave that alone. So then, I feel like my child has a relationship with their teddy bear. They tell the teddy bear secrets, and even if the teddy bear didn't exist, even if they just thought that they had a teddy bear, their relationship with that thing exists. We
Yes.
agree on that?
It's real, and that relationship itself
Yes.
is a reality in our universe.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
what happens when the kid loses their teddy bear? You know, I'm
Yes.
now a grandparent, and you know, when she was 2, one of our grandkids, if she lost her little Stuffy, oh my, hell to pay for a while till Stuffy was found.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think she was 2 years old, and someone from someone at a store, and they threw her favorite teddy away, and I almost went to jail over that. That was a ridiculous experience. So we agree that the relationship is real. The
Yes.
relationship with what?
The teddy bear.
The teddy bear that isn't real.
The teddy bear is real. It's, you know.
No. I'm sorry. In my analogy, the teddy bear doesn't actually exist. It's their imaginary friend.
Okay. It's an imaginary friend. Yeah, that's fine. I like that, because imaginary friend's actually a good test case. Let me see how I handle that. So the 5-year-old has her imaginary friend and has chats with her and tells her parents about all the cool things her and her imaginary friend have done. So the 5-year-old's experiences are real. She
Right.
experienced talking to the imaginary friend, but the
And
imaginary
it talking back.
and it talked. No, but maybe
She experienced it talking back,
she
whether
could
it did or not.
Yeah, let's go further and say she experienced the talking back, and so her experience is real, but the teddy bear, the imaginary friend, isn't. That's why we call it the imaginary friend. So it's almost perfect. Let's say I came from my father's side. They were quite religious, extremely devout Catholics, right? And one of my aunts, wonderful person, one of the nicest people you could ever meet. Charitable work that she did, and real charitable work. She didn't pay for the gold foil on the church steeple. She paid for coats for poor kids, right? And very, very fervent person. She was praying all the time, and she was having a conversation with her imaginary friend in the sky. I think the story's identical, but doesn't mean that the imaginary friend or the guy in the sky exists.
Right. It's just a matter of whether or not our group agrees that the imaginary friend exists.
Yeah.
And so then, is the relationship real? And if it is, then the relationship is real with what?
With your mental states, right? So the 5-year-old with the imaginary friend has a specific mental state which scaffolds the existence of imaginary friend. No other kid has the belief about that particular imaginary friend, and so it's in the kid's mental state to be available to have the relationship with this particular imaginary friend. And one could generalize that and say this is the brilliance of the mind virus. The mind virus gets a whole community of people to have the same imaginary friend. Isn't that a cool trick?
Right. Yes. Well, and I that's why I feel like love is a good example, because that is also a shared, what I would call delusion or illusion, probably is a better word. Because it really feels like, you ask any adolescent, most adolescents, and they know that love is real, and it feels more real that there's something like falling in love, or there's something like Cupid, or like there's some outside force. This is not happening in my head. This is an experience I entered into, and so it just feels undeniable. Whereas if anyone tells them, well, that type of love isn't real, it's just chemicals in your head, I know that's not true. I experienced that for myself. You can't tell me my imaginary friend doesn't exist. The relationship is real, and they talk back to me. It seems like we're talking past each other until we can talk about the illusion of it.
The illusion. I mean, it's not necessarily the illusion. As I said with the imaginary friend, the 5-year-old is actually having the conversation, and there are dances going on in her brain that are very similar to if she's talking to a real person. She just happens to be talking to an imaginary person. And love, I would say, is not an illusion or delusion. It's something we have labeled, right? It is perception, smell, touch, plus some very ancient parts of our brain, which light up with this warm glow, and we're approaching an intimate relationship of any sort, whether it's with a best friend or whether with a lover, etc. There's a number of hormones that start to flow, neuromodulators change. All these things are real, and we just happen to put the label on what happened. There's probably a good reason for it, because helps the species reproduce. We put a label on it, call it love, and so there's a set of these changes in our bodily and mental state, which we have collectively decided to put the label on, called love. And so I would not say it's a delusion. It is just a label. And it's a useful label so that we can talk to each other about the fact that we've all experienced love.
Right. Okay. So one last question before we switch topics, because obviously we spend the whole time here and not make any progress. So, if we talk about an optical illusion, one of those ones where you've got like the grid of squares that are all filled in, and if you're not looking at it, then you can see the little circle in between the squares, right? Do those circles exist in the Ruttian perspective? The ones that don't exist?
Yeah, the ones that don't exist on the piece of paper.
Right.
But they do exist as a firing pattern of neurons in your brain, which from the perspective of your consciousness, you believe they exist as a pattern in your brain. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go any further than that quite.
Is it fair to say they exist as an experience?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
They definitely exist as experience. But I would say one step stronger. They're almost certainly represented by a specific firing pattern of neurons, probably in your visual processing stack. So you actually have an illusion. So your brain's because the light comes in your eye, it goes up through a whole series of V stacks, V1, V2, V3, V4, etc. Somewhere in that V stack, probably around V3, there is a firing pattern of neurons that would be identical if the actual dot was on the paper. So the realism is in that firing of neurons in V3, let's call it, that would be exactly the same if there was a real dot on the paper.
Right. So it was actually really seen.
Yes.
With their eyes.
Yes.
Even though it doesn't exist. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. That feels analogous to me to the experience of God. Like it's real, it's there, and it can't be denied. For someone to say those circles don't exist, you didn't actually see those. Oh, I did see them with my eyes. Their existence is irrelevant.
Oh, well, yes, it's not irrelevant because I can prove that let's say I have a piece
to the argument. I'm sorry, they're irrelevant to the argument of whether or not they exist. You can't convince me I didn't see them because I did see them.
I could pull up a piece of paper and say, look, let's change the angle, let's change the lighting, no dots, and so there are ways to get to approximating ground truth on some things there's not. And so the dots, yes, we can get the ground truth. We can suspend the experiment, change the lighting, move your head. Oh, no dots, and be very, very, very convinced of it. But the cleverness of religion is they don't allow that changing of frame to disprove the hypothesis.
Well, the stakes are too high, right? I mean, whether or not there are dots there is relatively irrelevant. Most people have built their entire lives on their religious beliefs. And so that's where I think humans' greatest superpower, and that is their ad hoc rationalization, is really on display. Once you've got the stakes high enough and the facts in conflict with them enough, your ability to continue to believe this and change the facts to meet what you need to be true and what you've experienced to be true, then that seems like that's what's happening there.
I wonder how many, this is hypothetical, you might probably know a lot better than I do, having been a pastor. How many people really have had the experience of an encounter with the transcendent? Or are they just doing because their neighbors do and because they think the pastor's a pretty guy sitting up there and the songs are fun? How many people in your congregation you think actually have had experiences in a personal relationship with the transcendent?
Well, that is the definition of the difference between true Christians and fake Christians.
My guess is 95% are fake Christians, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, yes, except that, I mean, obviously, the experiment's probably better than I do of what's it called? It's not Zimbardo. It was one of the other guys. It's not Ash. Where everybody says the same thing, and then you convince yourself that you also have experienced that same
yeah,
thing?
the ash.
It was ash. Okay.
That's the lengths
Yeah.
of lines for the audience. There's
Right.
there's some lengths of lines, and they ask people which one's longer, right? And one's clearly longer than the other, and there's like 6 people around the table. The one poor sucker doesn't realize the other 5 are part of the experiment, and they just lie and say that the shorter one is longer. And in 50% of cases, in a fairly short period of time, the person who picks the right one, changes their position and goes with the wrong one. But it's only 50%, which is good. And then it takes a little bit of effort. But that's it. But that's this, what you called the fake Christian, which is, all my neighbors. Then, and of course, this is what I think is very interesting, and it may well be the case in some communities that they could all be faking, right? But their social. None of them ever had a face-to-face encounter with the transcendent. By the way, I do believe that many believers have had the experience of the face-to-face encounter in the same way the kid had, which I love this story. I'm going to start using this. The conversation with their imaginary friend or the optical illusion saw the dots. I mean, I do believe that there are believers who believe they have had the experience of being in the presence of the transcendent. But it's quite possible to have a religion in which nobody had the experience of the transcendent, but they all thought that the community thought that we all had the belief in the encounter with the transcendent. So therefore, through the same reason that the Ash experiment works, they all come to say that they believe.
Well, and I think that some people in the Ash experiment actually, if they are left there long enough, they actually do believe that it is wrong, and they distrust themselves. So there's that. Also, there's such a poor definition of what the experience is of the divine. It's like if you ask an 8-year-old, have you ever been in love? Do you know what love is? Like, well, yes, they know what love is. Then you take them to 15 and they're like, oh, no, that wasn't love. I know what love is now. And then they have their first kid and they're like, no, none of that was love. I know what love is now. There's such a terrible definition of what it means to experience God that everyone can honestly say, yes, I've experienced God, because whatever that thing was that we put the label on that was God, then I experienced God. So yes, 100%. And I don't think they're lying, even though they haven't had what you and I would call a transcendent experience.
I guess so. I guess. I'm not sure. I don't know. And nor do I really care.
Well, let's switch subjects then to AI and consciousness. Because similarly, it seems to me that consciousness is merely an emergent phenomenon of a complex neural net. What part of that do you disagree with?
None of it, but I think it doesn't go quite far enough. It's the dance of things going on in the brain-body system. Some of it's body, not necessarily just neurons, in response to perception and action, so that flows of things are coming through you, and also coupled to your memories. I think you can have consciousness without memories, but not our kind of consciousness. Our kind of consciousness is intimately connected to memories, and so I would say you're not wrong, but somewhat incomplete in your description. It's a more complex system than that.
Okay, so then in a psychedelic experience where you don't have memories, you're not conscious of them. You don't know who you are, or maybe you don't exist, and yet you're still there and conscious to experience the not being there. If that makes sense to you, I trust it does. Then, in what ways is that consciousness dependent on memories?
That catches, it may not be. And there's also, what's the hell's name? Thomas Metziger, a German philosopher of consciousness, has been studying what he calls, I believe it's empty consciousness, which is reached by certain very strong and deep meditators where there is no I. And not only is there no I, there are no contents at all. I can tell you from personal experience, psychedelics, there's plenty of content, right? This is not content free. I've got only once did I get to the point of ego death where there was no me. That was kind of cool, but there was still lots of stuff.
What was that on? Can I ask?
LSD.
Okay.
About 400 micrograms, I should load. That was cool. And subsequently, I could put myself into a mini ego death at any time. Well, not any time. If I'm in the right mood for about 5 to 10 seconds, and just the I goes away. I suspect it's probably something like a petit mal epileptic seizure, but it's not the same mechanism. So once you did it once, you could see how you could shake the ego out, but it really wants to come back, so I can't do it for very long. But some of these Buddhist meditators, Tibetans, they can do it for an hour. That's pretty cool.
But let's move to AI then. Is AI going to be conscious? Or how far away are we from that?
Yeah, this is hugely important. And as you may well know, I recently took on the position of chairman of the California Institute for Machine Consciousness. And it is our stated goal to bring the machines awake, right? But we can't prove we can do it. This is a mission, a scientific, a philosophical, right? An engineering, and maybe even a religious quest that we're on. And this is part that I have to educate people on a regular basis, which is intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. A bacterium is intelligent. It steers away from acid and heat and towards sugar, right? And it's pretty smart at how it does it. Very clever how the biochemistry machinery works. But at least within using a definition of consciousness as something like what ours is, or other mammals, or even reptiles, you can say pretty definitively that a bacterium is not conscious. I would also just happen to be on another podcast recently where the host asks a bunch of quick questions at the end. She says, "What's your probability that today's large language models are conscious?" And I said, 0. Because I know how their networks are architected. I know roughly and less well how the network architectures in our brain are wired that support consciousness and the things that are necessary, the functionalist things necessary to have our kind of consciousness, and they're not at all the same. So in that same talk, I then went on, chatted further, that I believe it could be possible that we could get to artificial general intelligence that was not conscious. I also, I didn't mention this, but I'd also believe it's true that the earliest machine consciousness may be really dumb, that consciousness and intelligence are two different dimensions, and entities can exist anywhere I don't know about anywhere, but there are many places in that two-dimensional space that a biological or machine entity could live. We know we have, there's a very interesting work on people who mostly don't have a cerebral cortex. So they basically don't have much of a brain. But they're still conscious. Some of the other parts of the brain seem to support that consciousness. They couldn't add 1 + 1 together, right? But they're still conscious, so they're not very intelligent, but they're conscious. And they're, of course, things like a chess computer beat the shit out of you in chess any day of the week. Mop the floor with Gary Kasparov. No consciousness at all. High probability. Self-driving car, extremely capable, but almost certainly no consciousness. It doesn't have the right architecture for consciousness.
So then, by your definition, dogs are conscious?
Oh, yes.
Right.
I would put at a very high probability that dogs are conscious. In fact, I would put it at a high probability, slightly lower as you go down the taxonomical scale. But I would say probably all mammals and all birds are conscious. If you say birds and mammals are conscious, you're probably also saying reptiles are conscious, because that was the ancestor from which both grew out, and maybe amphibians from which reptiles emerged. So if I had to pick a guess, though keep in mind with big error bars, I'd say frogs, amphibians, something like that. Maybe even one step further, which is the lobed fin fish from which amphibians emerged. So, again, we don't know for sure, but I'm pretty damn sure that dogs are conscious, that they have the same sensorium that we have. When I talk about the sensorium is important, the thing that you see, your microphone, the smell of your office, smell of your farts if you haven't had one recently, the buzz of the fan for the air conditioner, all those things are unified into a relatively seamless scene with a fair bit of detail. But guess what? The dog's scene has a lot more smell and a lot less vision. The frog scene, we think, is mostly vision, but extremely low resolution. About the only thing you can tell is when a fly flies in front of its face, close enough to stick its tongue out to grab it. But it seems to, based on neural readings, it seems like it's creating the scene at a regular rate, and it's updating it as new data comes in. And so it has a lot of the same aspects that ours does. So these things are so far difficult to prove one way or the other. There's still people who think dogs do not have consciousnesses, but I'm not of that school, and I think probably it goes back at least 200 million years.
Yeah, it sounds like we're just trying to put a line on a spectrum, some dividing line, a spectrum of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and it's then not hard for me to imagine that some consciousness far surpassing our own sees us as the frog. Like, well, they don't really have much going on. I mean, obviously they look when a girl walks by, but other than that, they're not really doing much. So then if the goal is to bring the machine awake, I have two competing questions here. Maybe I'll just say them both and see what's interesting, or I'll forget one. Bring the machine awake. How do you know when it's awake? And also, if you're comparing it to our awakeness, how do we know that a silicon's awakeness doesn't look significantly different enough from ours that it would be awake without looking like ours?
Yeah, it's both are good questions, and both of them, I have to say, we don't know, but that's work to be done in the science of machine consciousness. The first is really important. I mean, both are important, actually. The first one is really critical in the science, is we have to be able to define to some reasonable degree what it means for the machine to be awake. An objective measure, not just I suppose you could say, okay, you chatted with it and you believe it's consciousness. I'm pretty suspicious of that stuff. The Turing test turned out not to be a good test of, general intelligence.
Yeah. At what year do you think we passed the Turing test?
We have already passed the Turing test.
Right. Yeah. No. When in the past would you say? Because my idea, it seems like we're on whatever GPT-5 right now. 4.
Yeah, probably GPT-4 passed the Turing test, something like
right.
that.
Okay. But DARPA's not on GPT-4, right? Like there's another GPT out there that we don't have access to.
Yeah. NSA or the
Sure. So wherever we imagine the greatest large language model or artificial intelligence was, what year do you think we past that as a species?
I don't know, the last 2 or 3 years, probably.
Oh, wow. That recent. Okay.
Yeah. Because there was a huge jump. Language was always hard for computers. I mean, hundreds of man years went into so-called natural language processing. Poor careers of scientists and graduate students, it's all made obsolete with the wave of the magic wand when the large language models came out. It does it so much better. It's ridiculous. And I do know a fair bit about the history of the large language model and where it came from and who came up with the ideas. And so it's very unlikely that anybody was doing anything significant prior to 2015, and probably nothing at the scale that would come close to the Turing test, including at DARPA or at NSA before 2020. And if I had to, hazard a guess, it would, somewhere around 2022, probably. The public models probably didn't pass it until 2023. Private models might have been just a little bit before.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry I interrupted though. You were talking about the Turing test.
So we need a real test of consciousness. In fact, I'm actually doing some work on this, stealing some ideas from physics on can we calculate what's called an invariant that says that you have consciousness or not. I don't know if I'll be successful or not, but I'm working on it. But that's the one where we think we have consciousness, and we have to have a test that we all agree upon, or many people agree upon, that if this occurs, then we say it's conscious. And I hope it's better than the Turing test. Your second one's a more interesting one, which is, they're both interesting, but this is one that's kind of spooky. Maybe the consciousness that'll emerge will be so different that we won't even know it's there. And there's groups of people that say, oh, the internet's been conscious since 2001, right? But it's a distributed kind of consciousness that's not like the kind of consciousness we're thinking about, but it's there. I don't know how to address that. I suppose I could say that if we create the first, let's say if Rutt's invariance calculation of core consciousness turns out to be something that we all agree is a good test, which it currently is not, by the way. So don't tell anybody I have the measure for consciousness. I don't, but I'm thinking about it. If we then applied it to the theory that the internet is conscious, it would either pass the test or it wouldn't. And that's the best we can do in science. Science is not going to answer the metaphysical question of whether the internet itself is conscious and has been since 2001. You have to have a definition that's measurable that you can say yes or no to.
Okay, so you used the M word there. I've got a question about that too. If we can take a quick detour. So your recent Substack articles, both of them were fascinating. At least two of them that I know of on metaphysics, the use of metaphysics and what metaphysics is. So it seems to me like there's a bit of difference in definition from the way you're using it as to the way that most people use that term. Is this your construction, or is this a common use of metaphysics, the way that you're currently using it?
Okay, this is good. You know, people have all kinds of definitions of consciousness, right? It's all over the place. A lot of people, only humans have consciousness, right? Or only humans who meditate a lot have consciousness, or nobody has consciousness. It's an illusion. And there's all kinds of theories of consciousness. There's even more definitions of metaphysics. Now, you'll like this. The former president of the American Metaphysical Society of Philosophy read my paper and said he thought it was true. And he agreed with it 100%, almost 100%.
Okay. Wow.
So there was the guy, the president of the American Philosophical Society, professor of philosophy. And I've had other people look at it and say that they agreed. I've had other people look at it and say, you don't know the you're talking about. That's not metaphysics, right? That's scientism. All you've done is you've built a little thin layer of stuff right below science. And I go, well, that's why I called it minimum viable metaphysics. I'm not trying to claim that it's the metaphysics of everything. I say, this is all the metaphysics I need to be able to examine the world with some level of fidelity and some level, maybe false comfort, that what I'm doing makes sense. And that's all I was saying. And so, yeah, you can play the metaphysics game lots of different ways. I just happened to decide that I've been thinking about this for now 18 months. What is the minimum metaphysics necessary to do things in the world? And I came up with those three.
Right. So then it seems like most people that I've heard talk about metaphysics, they essentially mean supernatural.
Very few philosophers would use that. Almost nobody in science or philosophy would use that definition.
Okay.
Now, there's older definitions and in fact, I used to use it that way to mean, some supernatural horseshit, right? And I used to call it just metaphysical conjectures. Don't waste my time with metaphysics, right? In fact, if people listen to my podcast know one of the things I say the most is, when I hear the word metaphysics, I reach for my pistol, all right? I've even been known to wave a pistol around, and no bullets in it, though, people. And what I'm referring to in that case is what you're saying is supernatural beliefs. But no, I think that most philosophers today and most scientists who don't deny metaphysics flat out, which some of them do, are using it in a different sense on trying to understand the ground of being, basically. What is it about and I think I put a sharper edge on most by saying, what is it that we can't prove, at least can't prove now, but we nonetheless must believe? And to give your audience a sense of what I'm talking about, the first of my three commitments is realism. We cannot prove that that this universe is real. You cannot prove that the universe didn't click into existence 5 seconds ago with all of our memories in our head and the fossils in the ground, and it will click out of existence 5 seconds from now. Can't disprove that. Can't disprove the notion that you are a brain in a vat, and with wires coming in, and all this experience and our conversation is all simulated in your brain by a malicious computer. Can't prove that. But I concluded after staring at my navel for 18 months that if one's going to do anything at all interesting in the world, you just got to assume reality. So I made that my commitment number one.
Well, and this sounds to me like the imaginary friend, to take it full circle. Like it at some point you have to, because I can't prove that my wife exists, but I've got to make a decision. Am I going to move forward with this perhaps imaginary person and do something with that? Or am I going to just, live in this liminal state where I can't do anything because I'm still open to the idea that maybe she's not real?
Yeah, it's funny. I know people like that, actually. And I feel sorry for them. I think it's a mental problem if you can't just cut through the bullshit and say, I'm going to act as if the universe is real. And one of the reasons, and this is what I call the pragmatic school, the Charles Peirce school, is because it works, right? When you make the three commitments are the first being reality. The second being asymmetry, which is kind of technical and no real reason to go into that one. But the third one is lawfulness, that there is some lower level in which things are true and have been true and are true in a really fundamental sense, like the rest mass of an electron or the speed of light, the small set of things that are true. And then the thing that's very important, built on this, is emergence. Everything else came from emergent phenomena within a lawful range that allowed a whole level of levels upon levels upon levels of complexity to emerge over 13.8 billion years or whatever it turns out to actually be. And so I just say, all right, that's my commitment. I'm going with it, guys. I'm going to act as if it's true, and it turns out to be very useful. If I use these rules, I can develop steam engines, I can develop jet planes, I can develop medicines, I can build atomic bombs. And if these things were just utter bullshit somebody made up, they wouldn't work, but they do work. So that gives us increasing, you smack your wife's butt and she turns around and smacks your face. There's pretty good evidence that the wife exists, right? It's not philosophically provable, but it's good enough to exist in the world.
Okay, so don't hate me. I promise we'll wrap this up soon. So maybe it's good that I save this for last in case this is the end of it. But that sounds an awful lot to me like what I would hear a lot of religious people say about their religion. It works. Like who really? I can't prove it, but it gives me peace. It gives me all the things they're going to list. I'm not trying to convince you or convert you. I'm not on their team, but,
I understand.
The argument sounds the same.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, right? And this is something I talk about it for a bit. I haven't written anything about it yet, but no, I guess I haven't, not quite specifically on this. I call this the noble lie argument for God. This goes back to Plato, which he didn't quite frame it exactly like this, but you can see that he's clearly the father of it, which is belief in God does work for a lot of people. The epidemic, whatever the fuck word is, the research about how long people live shows that people believe in God probably live longer than people who don't, right? People who believe in God are probably happier on average than people who don't. So functionally, for this animal that co-evolved with mental viruses and the belief in mental viruses, where the belief in mental viruses caused group coherence to make my group more successful than your group and caused more downstream descendants, then it's no surprise that actually believing is good for us, even if it's not true. And so, I'll ask you this as a pastor. When you were a pastor, did you realize you were telling the noble lie, or did you actually believe?
That's one of the scariest questions there is. Sometimes, yes. Like there were parts I was uncomfortable with that I knew that I wasn't allowed to say I was uncomfortable with because I knew that overall what I was saying was true, but I wasn't as confident as I was trying to pretend I was for their sake. In some cases, hopefully not very frequently, but yeah.
So you were the noble semi-liar. You thought the core holdings were true, but maybe some of the details, we just tell you that because it's good for you, right? And this is it's a huge question, I think, in societal design and ethics, and just is the noble lie okay? And so I would contrast it with my minimal metaphysics, which is I don't know. But I will say I don't know, but I say it's useful to believe. But that's all I need to do science and to do math and to do logic and do engineering, etc. The noble lie goes one step further, is we're going to tell people it's true, even though we know it's not, because the belief in the noble lie is good for them and good for society.
Right. So at the end of your article, you say, mathematics and logic ask what follows these axioms. Science asks what does evidence support. Metaphysics asks what must we assume about reality for evidence to matter. And it seems to me like the only thing that's missing from that collection is what is the experience like? What is it like what is the feeling like to live in this? And that's where it feels to me like religion comes in the same way that we could describe all the hormones included in love, but then if you want to ask like, okay, but what does it feel? What is it like to be in love? Well, now I need to tell you about some lies like Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast or something like this in order for you to understand the actual experience of it. And that feels like the job that religion is doing is, well, here's what is, but the numinous, the feeling of this thing over here is these stories that I have to tell you that feel real, even though they're made up. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would contrast that, but there's a line here, but it's fuzzy. For instance, I believe mystical experiences are very real. I've had a few. I even thought God talked to me on 4 different occasions. Right, the shit that he told me was pretty fucking weird. Right, but I know that I don't know anything. I don't know if the universe is 5 seconds old. But my read was, boy, you got a mighty active imagination, right? And the context kind of explained why it seemed like I might think at that time that God was talking to me on 4 separate occasions, and who knows, maybe he was, and I can't prove that he wasn't, but that is somehow different mystical experiences that we know that we don't know, but we can say are internal versus making ontic claims about reality. And that's my objection to religion, that the religions actually claim the guy in the sky is there. If religion said believing in the guy in the sky is good for you, but he doesn't
work then.
But he doesn't exist. This is the interesting and weird conundrum, which I got to say is an engineering problem for social operating systems. John Vervaeke talks about the God-shaped hole left in our souls with the Enlightenment, and he has talked in the past. He doesn't so much anymore about the religion that's not a religion. What's that ecology of practices that does the same thing for our well-being that religion does, but makes knowingly false statements?
Yeah. His work is fascinating. I love that. Your work is fascinating as well. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this was a heck of a lot of fun. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining me. If you would like even higher level conversations with less censorship, then subscribe to his Substack and his podcast, and we'll be reading and listening together. If you're new to my channel and you love it, it's free to consume, but it's far from free to make. The good news is there's a link in the description for free and easy ways to give back, and we can keep this love train rolling. Be well, my distant cousins. I'm rooting for you, and you should too.